Good afternoon. I'm Kory, Sheriff of Butte County, and we're here today to talk about a pretty important topic. It's about getting the properties that were affected by the camp fire cleaned up. And I know it's a tough decision that a lot of people are facing, but we're coming close to the point where that decision has got to be made. And so I've got a lot of questions from members of the community about this process. I thought it'd be good to get some people here who know about the process so that they could talk about the pros and cons, answer some of the questions that you might have, and hopefully help you in making that decision, because again, it's a decision that's got to be made. It's got to be made pretty quickly. So I'm going to allow my partners here to introduce themselves, and then we'll start talking about the process. Eric?
Thanks, Sheriff, for being with us today. My name is Eric Lamoureux. I'm the Senior State Official with Cal OES here in Butte County.
Hi, I'm Casey Hatcher with Butte County, and I'll be able to answer questions about the alternative program.
Great, thank you both, and I appreciate it. As I've said, I've gotten a lot of questions from members of the community. It's not uncommon for people to come up to me and ask me about this whole cleanup process and the right of entry forms and things of that nature, and certainly have a fundamental or rudimentary understanding of it, but I think it would be good to go through what the process is for people to understand that if they haven't. Now, as I understand, there's been essentially two phases, and the first phase is already underway and is almost complete, and that was the phase where the EPA came in and removed what they considered to be hazardous materials and toxic materials. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
so phase one, household hazardous waste, has been the US EPA and the State Department of Toxic Substances Control removing small propane tanks, lead batteries, containers that still have chemicals in them. We thought that was going to take us about 4 to 6 months. We're nearly done. We're approaching 11,000 properties out of 13,000, so we're well ahead of schedule on that effort.
So that's certainly good news. And would that account for, when I've driven around in the areas that impacted by the fire, sometimes I'll see like propane tanks or paint canisters, things like that kind of stacked up on the driveway and things like that. Is that the product of that phase?
That is, yeah. So those items get left behind.
Okay.
And during phase two cleanup, we'll remove those as part of our overall cleanup effort.
Okay, so has anything been taken away from those properties up to this point, or have they just been stacked up and prepared for the next phase?
Sometimes there are some smaller items that we'll move off, household hazardous waste items. Sometimes if there's a large collection like you've seen,
okay,
propane tanks, it's easier sometimes for our phase one contractors just to leave it there, and then the phase two contractors come in and pick it up. But if anything's been removed, it's just been small household hazardous waste items.
The bottom line is that those things are stacked there for a reason, because they pose a risk to public health, correct?
Absolutely.
And so we should leave them there and allow them to be transported away and disposed of properly, correct?
Yep. Our crews will take care of that, and really what we're talking about with this entire cleanup is public health and safety threats. So phase one's been getting rid of that most egregious of threats, if you will. Phase two is coming in and removing the rest of the contaminated ash and debris.
Okay. So we're now at a point where we start to look at phase two. And phase two is a decision point for many people who own properties. And as I understand it, and I want you to kind of flesh it out for us a little bit, there are pros and cons to the various approaches. It kind of depends on your circumstance, what's the best approach. But the bottom line is a decision has got to be made one way or the other, because we've got to clean up this area, not only for us to be able to move forward and start to be rebuilt, but we want our community to be safe, right?
Absolutely. The community can't recover and rebuild until it's safe. And so everybody's got a responsibility to clean up their contaminated ash and debris. They can choose to use our program, something we've been doing across California for more than 12 years. They can choose to hire a contractor to do it themselves. And unfortunately, for those folks that don't choose one of those two options, the county or the town will go through an abatement process and ultimately get the property cleaned up.
The bottom line is the property will get cleaned up.
Absolutely.
That's just has to be the case. Well, let's start first with the state program. Is that right? And that's the program that, am I correct in assuming that you and the Governor's Office of Emergency Services would be overseeing it? Is that correct?
We will be. So the federal government, state government, county, and the town have all authorized funding for it.
Okay.
State government, we will oversee the cleanup. So we, Cal OES, have tasked Cal Recycle to go out and execute contracts with 3 prime contractors. So there'll be 3 prime contractors here in Butte County overseeing running the entire cleanup operation. Probably be 2 contractors working Paradise and a 3rd working the unincorporated area. So those contractors will have responsibility for going and removing all the contaminated ash and debris, as well as contaminated concrete and contaminated soil on the properties where we get permission from the homeowners. So it's a great program we've been exercising for about 12 years, started in 2007 after the Agora fire.
Okay.
And we've been executing this program in rural metropolitan communities communities to great success for more than 12 years.
Okay, well, let's start with the process,
Yeah.
because before that happens, the people who own the property, they have a decision to make as to whether or not they want to go with this program or go with another program, which we'll talk in a minute about. But the first step in that, am I correct in saying the first step in that is for them to sign and turn in the right of entry?
Yeah, turning in that right of entry form gives us permission to come onto their parcel and clean up any contaminated ash and debris or vehicles that maybe had been destroyed in the fire. So the right of entry form is the critical point right now, and the deadline for folks to submit that is January 31st.
Okay, and I think that's important because it demonstrates that people do have control over their property. It is their property, right? And they have the ability to decide how this property is going to get cleaned up within the parameters of the law, correct?
Absolutely.
And so that right of entry form is that first step. If this is the program that you decide to go to, you have to sign that right of entry form. So you said a moment ago that they clean up the property as well as the cars and things like that. So explain that to me. What does that look like?
So that is dump trucks, excavators on your property. Usually takes about 2 to 3 days to get through a parcel. Some of our parcels in Paradise we might get through a little quicker than that. There's crews on the ground that are directing the equipment. They're first separating out metal. Metal will go off site. Then they're collecting all the contaminated ash and debris. It goes into a dump truck that's lined with plastic. Truck gets wrapped like a burrito and sent off to landfill. Then we remove all the concrete that's on the site, and then we scrape the soil. Usually about 3 to 6 inches of contaminated soil gets removed. Then we test that site, and if the test results come back clean, then we're done, and the property owner will get a certification back that the property's been cleaned of all contaminated ash and debris.
Okay, so I want to go back and dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
And the first point that I want to talk to you about is, you talk about these crews coming on and cleaning the property, and they load them into dump trucks. You said that they wrap them up in plastic, like a burritos, I think is the term they used. Why do they do that?
Well, we do that to ensure that we're not having additional contaminated ash and debris leaving that site and getting spread around the community. Integrity, environmental integrity, protecting the environment, protecting the safety of the community is critically important. We're going to be using water on the site as we're removing the debris to keep particulates down. We're going to be air monitoring at the site and throughout what we call our haul routes to make sure that we're not adding additional particulates to the air. And then the third critical thing we do is we burrito wrap, so that as that ash and debris is leaving that person's home site, we're not spreading that ash and debris through the community.
Right, so that's a big deal, a big part of this, to make sure that we're not contaminating other parts of the county that haven't been impacted by this whole fire. And I think that goes back to maybe a question is, well, why can't I just do this myself, right? Why can't I just get out there with a shovel and load it into the back of the truck and haul it off?
Yeah, so the county's got a program where you can hire a contractor to do it yourself, and those contractors will have to follow the same requirements.
We're gonna get into that in a minute, but I wanna go strictly to the point of, hey, it's my property.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Why do I need the government to come in here and tell me how I'm gonna clean up my property? I mean, why can't I just load it in a truck? And I think that you spoke to that in a moment ago, when this is a fairly technical kind of work, and you need to make sure that you're not, by doing it yourself, if that were allowed, and we will talk about how it's not, that you wouldn't be endangering the rest of the community as you haul it off, correct?
You know, we're not talking about one isolated structure fire. We're talking about 13,000 parcels where homes and garages and outbuildings burned. We have a major public health and safety emergency with all this contaminated ash. And so it's important that collectively as a community, we handle that material the right way so that we don't create a bigger safety or environmental concern in Butte County.
This is the magnitude, the scope of this is so large that we need to have a systematic approach that does its best to mitigate the impacts to public safety and public health, right?
Again, back to our original point, this is all about the safety of the community. We've got to make the community safe to stimulate recovery, and doing that cleanup the right way will ensure that we keep the community safe, keep the environment as clean as we can.
When you were also talking about how that cleanup looks, you talked about removing cars. So if there are cars on the property that have been burned out, those get removed as well, right?
They do.
What if I have a car that's on, I have a vintage car that's on the property. I want to do what I can to restore it, or I want to get some kind of value out of it. Am I precluded from doing that?
That's a great question. We get that a lot. And no, you're not.
Okay.
Just let us know in your right of entry form that you want to keep that car. And what we'll do is we'll clean the car on the site. We'll leave plastic underneath it, and we'll leave it there on site for you.
Okay.
So folks have that a lot of times where there's something in particular that they want to make sure doesn't get damaged or removed.
Right.
Right of entry form is the best place to let us know about that. And then when we contact you, and we'll contact you about 5 to 7 days before cleanup to do sort of a walkthrough of your site, that's another time where it's good to talk to us about those unique circumstances and things you might want left behind.
So I want to come back to that in terms of the contact and the time frame, because I think that's important. But you talked a moment ago about removing all of the debris. Obviously, if there's something that is important that wants to stay, you can articulate that in your right of entry form. Taking the concrete, that's the foundation, that gets all taken out, and then removing 3 to 4 inches of soil from that standpoint. I have heard complaints and issues and concerns in the community that in prior fires they have removed, and this is some of the things that, they've left a swimming pool size hole. I don't know if that's in terms of the length or the depth, but in these properties.
Yeah.
What's your thought on that? Has that been your experience, or can you speak to that?
So as I said earlier, our program's been a state-run program for about 12 years, and all of our state-run cleanup efforts, we've had phenomenal success. There's always going to be challenges and issues, but by and large, our program works extremely well. Last year, October 8th, we had 14 fires across 7 counties in Northern California, including here in Butte County. And on that particular cleanup, we didn't have the capability to do that entire cleanup with state resources. So we asked the federal government to help us last year.
Okay.
They brought in contractors and crews to do the cleanup in the North Bay. And that's where folks are talking about a lot of this.
Okay.
Because in that situation, we cleaned up about 6,000 properties in about 6 months. But we had about 500 properties where more soil was taken than we wanted to see taken.
Okay.
Ultimately, the state came in and remedied all those situations, but that was a situation because of the federal government. They don't have the ability to oversee the contract tactically quite the same way we can in the state government, and so unfortunately they had some subcontractors that removed more soil than should have been removed. Here this year in Butte County, it's going to be a state-run cleanup effort.
Okay.
We have the ability to closely monitor at that site what's happening to ensure that all of our standards are being met, and if they aren't being met, we have the ability to stop work, and that's a critical piece that unfortunately we didn't have last year with the federal government. So we have the ability to stop work, figure out what's going on, and make sure that we're meeting the expectations that we've set for ourselves and what we've told the public we're going to do on their behalf.
So that's a lesson learned from prior fires, and you don't anticipate having that same problem here, even though this is a massive fire, the biggest one that we've seen.
Yeah, this will be a state-run cleanup, and we just have a lot more control over the work of our contractors tactically out in the field.
So coming back to that point a little bit in terms of control and oversight and things like that, you talked about the ability to stop work. So let's say I'm a property owner and I opt for the state program, assign the right of entry. They let me know 5 to 7 days in advance. The work starts. Am I allowed to be on the property and watch the work being done?
So you can't be on the property. We set up what we call an exclusion zone for the safety of our crews and the safety of the public. So if you can safely stand outside that exclusion zone without maybe being in the roadway and in the way of traffic, then that is fine. You can be in the exclusion zone, but you won't be able to control the operations. But you can certainly stand there safely and observe it.
Sure, I understand that, and what I'm getting at, and I think what probably alleviate a lot of concern, is if it's my property and I have some concerns, I can stand on the perimeter of the cleanup site. We understand, we don't want people in the construction area or the area of the cleanup that might get hurt, things like that. But let's say I start to see them remove, a foot of soil. Is there a number I can call? Can I get a hold of somebody in charge and say, hey, wait a second, there's a problem out here?
Yeah, we actually have a number that folks can call today, and they can call it at any point during this operation. Casey, do you happen to have that number handy?
We'll get it in just a second.
We'll get that for folks. We've got a debris operations center set up here in Chico at the corner of Esplanade and West Lassen. That's our office. That's where our operators work out of. Folks can walk into that office at any time and get questions answered. They can also call that office if they've got a concern. And there's certainly staff that are on site. If somebody's there during the cleanup, there'll be staff there that they can go over and say, hey, this doesn't look right.
Okay.
But programmatically, historically, we usually see about 3 to 6 inches of soil removed. If we generally have to take more, it's because those test results came back negative. There's still contaminants, and we need to remove a little bit more.
So who's going to be responsible for the testing of the soil?
So the testing of the soil will be done by the state's contractors.
Okay.
All of the soil goes to a lab. Usually takes about 2 to 3 days for
Okay.
it to come back. So we will have both the prime contractor, and we'll also have a contractor that oversees all of the monitoring, the site assessments before the cleanup, the monitoring during the operation. And then we've actually added a third layer, because of some of the challenges we saw last year, of additional state auditors that'll be overseeing the entire. So we've got monitors on site, and we've got additional state auditors that'll be overseeing all the activities of the entire operation.
Good. And I appreciate that. And I told you I was going to ask you about this contractor, because I think people are aware of some controversy involving one of the contractors. Now, I understand the state agency that is hiring the contractors and directing it is which agency?
Cal Recycle.
Cal Recycle. And so, if I understand the hierarchy of this particular operation, it's the Governor's Office of Emergency Services oversees the entire operation. Cal Recycle has been tasked with this particular piece of it, and then they have reached out to contractors to help with the cleanup. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Tetra Tech is one of those contractors. Is that correct?
So Tetra Tech's a company that Cal Recycle, we've used Cal Recycle on, I believe, more than a half dozen of our state-run cleanup efforts.
Okay.
And have never had any challenges
Okay.
With them. Tetra Tech, they've been in the news. There's information about some of their employees on past work unrelated to our cleanups where they've had challenges. I don't know all the details. All I can speak to is our relationship with them, state of California to Tetra Tech. They have worked on a number of our programs across California. We've never had any challenges. We've never had any work that they've done inappropriately or incorrectly. There was a competitive bid that was done for the assessment work that Tetra Tech will do. They were successful in that bidding process. And so at this point, based upon our past experiences working with them and the additional level of oversight that we're bringing into the project this year, we're confident that they will continue to perform as they have on past cleanup projects here in the state.
Good. And I appreciate it. I want to highlight what you just said right there, because I think that's important to get to, and if I understand. And admittedly, I'm not an expert in the allegations that were leveled against them with some work. There was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle that I had an opportunity to look over. But the basis of that was essentially there was somebody within the company that was falsifying records with regard to whether or not the sites were actually clean. There's two sides to every story. I understand that, and sometimes you don't always get a full understanding of that. But obviously, the specter or the prospect that the results would be falsified would be alarming to any member of my community, and certainly alarming to me. I want this community to be safe. I know you do as well.
Absolutely.
And so I recognize that you guys have had a good track record with this particular company. May not have experienced the same kinds of issues or problems that are highlighted in that article that I'm referencing. But it sounds to me like there's also an additional level of verification to make sure that we don't get into that. And so when you say that those are going to be tested, in addition to what the contractors tested, who's going to be doing that?
So the actual, I don't know if it's Tetra Tech or another contractor that does the actual work of collecting the samples. We collect borings on each site. They go to an off-site lab. That lab does all of the testing and analysis against what the background level is in Butte County, and they return the results to us. And then our operations team looks at those results to determine, did we remove all the contaminants, or do we have additional soil that has to be removed?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's important for a couple reasons. Obviously, this is a public health issue, right? We want the soil to be clean, but then beyond that, when people go to rebuild, they want to make sure that they're rebuilding on soil that is safe and not contaminated. And at some point in the future, if they decide to sell their property, they want to be able to certify that the property is safe and that that's not an issue for them later on, correct?
Yeah, and what we're fortunate of here in California with this program, this is unique to the nation. This is not the way fire debris removal is cleaned up around the country. We not only remove those contaminants, but we ensure that that soil is clean. So when your family and your children come and they're playing on that soil during the rebuild, it's clean, we know it's clean, and we know that you've got the family is safe and has a fantastic environment in which to rebuild that home, rebuild their lives.
So we've talked a little bit about how the program looks and how it works and how you get started, and certainly some of the benefits of it. And we've also talked about some of the things that are going to be done to try to mitigate some of the challenges that they've experienced in other situations. Is there an estimate about the amount of money that it costs to clean up one of these sites?
So the cleanup, on average, probably about $80,000 to $90,000
Okay.
for us to clean up one of these sites. And I think when you talk about the advantages, disadvantages, a lot of times people wanna base that upon what's it gonna cost. I think probably the biggest advantage to the person that wants to do it themselves is they're gonna have more control over the timing. They won't necessarily save money.
Okay.
And the reason is we don't look to pull anything out of somebody's pocket for the cost of the cleanup. What we look to do is collect what they have in their insurance policies specifically for debris. And if someone's got $20,000 in their in their insurance for debris, we're gonna be looking to collect $20,000. If they go out and hire another contractor, undoubtedly they're gonna be able to find a local Butte County contractor that can do it for less than us, but it's probably gonna be more than that $20,000 they've got set aside for debris. And so they're gonna end up having to pay more potentially out of pocket or from other portions of their insurance proceeds.
All right, well, let's dissect that a little bit.
Sure.
So let's start with this. So if you're a person who owns a piece of property and it wasn't insured, right? Then you're not gonna have, unless you go completely out of pocket, right? The monetary resources to probably clean this up. And so under those circumstances, there's a lot of benefit to going with the state program.
Tremendous benefit.
Right.
Tremendous.
Because it's gonna cost them nothing at that point at all, right? You're gonna come in and you're gonna clean it up. And you mentioned it a little while ago that in those cases where, for example, they took too much soil, the state came in and helped make that right. Is that correct? Okay.
Yep.
So from that standpoint, if I'm a person, owns a piece of property, it wasn't insured, the decision point for me at this point is probably I should go with the state program. It is a pretty favorable option given the fact that I don't have any, I would otherwise have to come out of pocket on it, right?
Absolutely, for the individual, and I think for the community as a whole, the more folks that opt into our program, the more efficient we're gonna be able to use the hundreds of contractors that we're gonna mobilize to get this cleanup done as quickly as possible. The more folks that are doing it on their own, the less ability we have to ensure that the community as a whole gets cleaned up as quickly as possible.
Got it. So let's move to the next group of people, because that becomes a more difficult decision point, and those people who are insured. And if I understand correctly, depending on your insurance policy, you might have a portion of your insurance policy that pays for debris removal. It could be up to the amount that it costs to actually remove it, or it could be something less than that. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And so if I am one of those people and I decide to go with the state's program, you'll come in, you'll clean it up. Whatever the cost is, or is going to be covered by you, but the amount of money that I would have received from my insurance to go towards cleanup would then have to be turned over to the state. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And it'll actually be the county that will do the ultimate collection
Okay.
of those proceeds. That collection will happen after we've completed the entire cleanup project, which we hope we're working to be done within 12 months from the time we start. And that insurance collection will happen if you've got one of those policies where it's part of your umbrella policy, it's tied to your rebuild, we're gonna let you rebuild first, especially if you're underinsured and you end up having to tap into some of those debris proceeds. We want you to be able to rebuild. Additionally, sometimes folks, after we've done our cleanup, they may have some additional debris they need to clean up that wasn't part of our program.
Okay.
We want them to be able to use those proceeds to do that cleanup, save those receipts. So let's say someone had $10,000 for debris, and after we're done, they had to go spend another $2,000 to clean up something that wasn't eligible. Then there's only gonna be $8,000 remaining for us to collect for our program.
So if I understand correctly, the maximum amount of money that they would have to turn over to the county for the program would be the maximum amount payable under their policy. They're not gonna have to come out of pocket beyond that.
No.
And then it's they're gonna be allowed to rebuild, so if they could use part of those proceeds as part of the rebuild or some additional cleanup that was covered, that's gonna go towards that and not have to be taken out.
Absolutely.
So it's certainly possible that they could use all of those funds through the rebuild and subsequent cleanup and never and won't have money left over that would be.
And that does happen frequently
Okay.
in the program.
So I guess the question I would have is I suspect there are people with some uncertainty. Well, at the end of the day, they want a dollar figure. What's this going to cost me? How am I going to figure this out? What's the best way for them to reconcile that or to come to understand that?
Well, again, they need to understand their insurance policy, so they need to be sitting down with their insurance carrier now, if they haven't already, to understand what's in my policy for debris. Once you understand that,
Right.
then you understand what the sort of top line universe is of what we might collect
Okay.
from you after our cleanup is.
Right, so you have the outer limit, and then
Yeah.
you can work back from there.
Right.
But you really do need to sit down with your insurance carrier
Absolutely.
and really have an understanding of that.
Yeah, and a lot of times folks want to ask Casey and I questions about their insurance policy, and we're not in the best position to be able to speak. Everybody's policies are a little different. In some cases, if somebody doesn't rebuild or they don't repurchase, their debris portion of their policy may not get triggered. And if it doesn't get triggered, then there won't be an ability for us to collect it. So everybody's policies are a little bit unique. And so it's
Okay.
important to understand your policy with your insurance carrier.
Okay, so that is the one piece in terms of the potential con, if you will, not figuring out what it's gonna cost or what I'm gonna have to pay out of my policy. There is another piece of that, and that is the control over when this happens,
Yeah.
right? And so how long do we anticipate this entire cleanup process to take?
We're looking to have boots on the ground starting work on January 28th, so week
Okay.
after next. We are setting all of our work plans up with the metric of being done in 12 months. We want to have all of the properties that we get permission to clean up in Butte County done within 12 months.
So 1 year.
And so we will be setting daily and weekly milestones to work toward meeting that objective, and we'll position our crews throughout Paradise and Butte County to ensure that we can move forward on that objective.
So has there been a decision made in terms of the strategy, the approach? Are you gonna start in one end of the fire affected area and work your way across it? Or are you gonna start in a particular area and work out? How is that gonna play out?
So we're gonna have 3 prime contractors. 2 of those prime contractors will essentially split up the town of Paradise. The
Okay.
3rd prime contractor will deal with the properties, potentially as much as 4,500 properties in the unincorporated area. We will have crews working throughout all areas at all times.
Okay.
So we're not gonna necessarily, some folks are concerned that we're gonna clean up Paradise before we get to Yankee Hill and Concow, Butte
Right.
Creek. We are gonna have crews in all areas at all times. At any given time, just because of the logistics capability for us, we'll probably have more crews operating in Paradise at any given time than we may have in some of the unincorporated areas where it's a little tougher to move heavy truck traffic back and forth. But we will have crews working throughout all areas at all times. The thing for us, we don't know right now how many properties we're gonna have cleaned up and where they are.
Okay.
So as we start to learn that, we're able to strategize where we can operate most efficiently. One of the things that will drive where we are when we're there is where we've got concentrations of right of entry. So if we have an entire neighborhood or neighborhoods adjacent to one another where we've got permission, we can move into that area, offload our equipment, and be able to clean that up much faster than cleaning up 1 property here and 2 here and 3
Right.
there. So as folks sign up for the program, we're able to start building out our strategy. What we will commit to folks is we'll let folks know the areas we're gonna be in on any given week.
Okay.
And then hopefully the next week out, be able to let folks know where our crews are gonna move to then. So we'll work to be as efficient as we can in concentrating on areas where we've got concentrations of right of entries, while also considering we've got schools to clean up, we've got critical watersheds
Right.
where we may have burned properties, we wanna get to those. We have folks whose homes weren't lost.
Right.
And so one of the things we always look at is, can we clean up the homes around them that were destroyed? And so there's a multitude of different things, factors that we'll look at in prioritizing. The most important thing, though, is that we will do all that in consultation with the town of Paradise and the county of Butte.
Okay.
They will drive to us what they believe the priorities should be, and then we'll build our operations around that.
So if I understand, it's a bit of a multi-layered approach in terms of how you're gonna start your cleanup that tries to take into account the fact that we don't wanna leave people in the outlying areas to the end of the project having to wait. But at the same time, you wanna maximize your resources by focusing on areas where you can get as much work done as possible.
Yep.
So, I mean, in that regard, I mean, if you're in a neighborhood and you know you have neighbors and things like that, certainly if it's advantageous for all of your neighbors to go with the state program, it's advantageous for everyone to sign the right of entry so that we can get in there and get those things cleaned up.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I hope I've got 13,000 right of entry forms
Sure.
for our crews. We know that we probably won't get that many,
Right.
but the more we've got, the more efficient and productive we can be in getting the whole community clean.
So I have one more quick question along that, and then I want to move over and talk a little bit about the alternative program, some of the pros and cons of that. And that is, you know, and I've heard about it in these right of entry forms, you know, like a lot of legal documents, they have lots of language in there about waiving liability and not having any recourse talked a little bit about in the past, for example, when there was too much soil taken, the state came in and helped make that right. First off, what can people do to protect themselves from unnecessary destruction or damage? And then two, if that happens, what can they do to perhaps make that right?
So first is letting us know what you've got on your property that you don't want damaged. And a lot of times we're talking about things, especially subterranean things, your septic tanks, your leach lines, if you've got pool lines coming out of a pool, if you've got sprinkler lines, letting us know where those are, even marking them out on your property, but also letting us know on the ROE, talking to us about it when we reach out and contact you, letting us know where those items are. If you've got items, a decorative retaining wall, decorative patio, those are items that we wouldn't normally remove, but if you want to be extra sure, make sure to point that out to us. We'll make sure that we conduct our operations so we don't damage those things. Now, things happen. You know, incidental damage happens. Incidental damage is probably not something most of the time we're going to be able to take care of, and that's why the ROE is written the way it is. But if we're negligent and we clearly break something, destroy something, remove something that we very clearly should not have, we will look at each of those on a case-by-case basis, and historically in our program, we've remedied those situations. But we'll really look at each situation on a case-by-case and evaluate that.
The point is there's some recourse. It's not a blanket, hey, that's your problem, we're not going to deal with it. There will be some recourse.
Correct.
And then beyond that, I guess it would depend on the policy, but perhaps incidental damage or something needed repaired might fall under your policy in terms of rebuilding.
It's possible, yeah.
Okay. So now, I think we've talked about what the state's program is, but there is another alternative. And the other alternative is the program, I guess, described as the county program, is that correct? And I think, Casey, you're probably the subject matter expert on that program. Is that fair to say?
I'll give that a try.
All right. So, again, people have the right to choose one of these options. Either have the state come in and do it. Once they sign the right of entry form, they mark out what needs to be done or what shouldn't be done, and then they have the ability to oversee it from a distance. But at that point, you guys kind of just take care of things from that point forward.
Absolutely.
The county program allows people to hire qualified, certified contractors to come in and do all of the work that we just talked about. Is that correct?
That's right. So the county's alternative program, so it's the same for the county as it is for the town. We've worked together to establish that alternative program. It's the exact same standard that Cal Recycle used. In fact, we mirrored the standard that Cal Recycle used, which is where the requirements came from. And so you'll be cleaning to the same exact level, and you'll get the same thing from your contractor that you'll get from Cal Recycle's contractors, which is a certificate that your property is clear of contaminants and clean to rebuild.
Okay, so let's talk about that. And I hit on this a little while ago about, why can't I just come in with my pickup truck and some shovels and load it in and haul it off to the dump and dump it? It's because there's a public health risk to this, right?
Sure. This is a public health emergency. It's not just one home. And people say this to me a lot. Well, if my home burned down yesterday or the day before the fire, I'd be able to clean it up. Well, that would be just one home, and there's 13,000 properties here.
Right. So
it's making sure that the entire community stays safe. Okay.
So we get to this the point now where selecting a contractor, and I think earlier on you talked about if I'm correctly stating what you said was undoubtedly you'd be able to find a contractor to clean up, and I wonder if that's an accurate statement. Not that you were intentionally saying it wasn't, but this is not just your everyday run of the mill. I mean, you can't just say, hey, I'm a plumbing contractor. I can come and do this. There's some special certifications that require.
Right. So you have to hire a contractor that's properly licensed, and the California State License Board actually determines what those licenses are.
Okay.
So you also have to hire appropriately certified consultants to assist with that.
Okay.
Whether that's someone to test for asbestos, hazardous materials, test the soil, whatever that looks like.
Okay.
So it's going to take a group of folks to work on your property.
Okay.
And there is a whole packet. It's the alternative program guidelines, and it's about 37 pages long, and it tells you all the things that you have to do. There's a sample application form in there, a work plan, because you and your contractor have to put together a whole work plan and say, these are all the things that we're gonna do and how we're gonna do them.
Okay.
Submit that to Butte County Environmental Health, have that approved, and then you'll get authorization to start the work. So all of the different stages of cleanup, the same as what Eric talked about with the state program, your contractor has to do those same things.
And so you're really talking about a team
That's
of
right.
people that, with subject matter experts, specialties, that come in doing what the state program does. And I'm assuming that there are those kinds of contractors around, but they may have to come from out of the area. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I think that we absolutely have local
We do.
contractors
Okay,
here
very
that can
good.
do this work.
Perfect.
And it's really important to us that our local contractors are employed here. It's
Great.
absolutely important that anybody who is displaced, maybe lost their business, lost their home where they were working out of as a contractor as a part of this fire, finds work, either as a subcontractor to the state program,
Okay.
and we're helping to make those connections.
Good.
Or that they can get the correct certifications that they need and maybe training that they need. We're working with our workforce development partners to make sure workers can get HAZWOPER trained so that they can work on these sites. But that licensed contractor, that's something that's already going to exist,
Okay.
right? And so we're hoping that the subcontractors can be local to the extent that they're available. Maybe the people doing the hauling and the truck driving can be local, all of that. So we're doing our best to help connect contractors together.
Good.
We're working with the Valley Contractors Exchange and holding meetings for contractors to understand the requirements. But we will undoubtedly have people working in our area that aren't local contractors.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because obviously that's a concern of mine, having people from out of the area come in. Certainly we have seen challenges with out of the area contractors who've been brought in by the utility crews. I don't know that they have the same love for our community that the locals do. And so I'm glad to hear that there is an emphasis on getting the local contractors and local workforce involved in this. And so I want to hit on 2 points. And one is, it sounds like there's a real effort being done to help people get the certification they need that allow them to work for these certified licensed contractors, both in the state program as well as if they offer the county program. And is there a resource that people can go to find contractors or these teams of people who are capable of pulling this off, a list of them so that they would aid them in their search? Is there anything like that right now?
So the county and the town can't actually put those lists out, unfortunately. Since we can't create a comprehensive list, it's hard for us to give any
Okay.
one contractor, which I know feels a little frustrating for homeowners because it's a big decision to make.
It is huge.
In the alternative program guideline, which is available at ButteCountyRecovers.org, or you can come into any Butte County Environmental Health office and pick up a copy. There are some links to the Contractor State License Board where you can see what type of contractor you need and how to verify their license.
Okay.
You can also check with the Valley Contractors Exchange, which is located in Chico, and they may be able to help direct you to contractors. But it's the responsibility of the property owner to find the right contractor, hire the right contractor, and oversee the work.
Right. And so I think more responsibility, more work is certainly put on the property owner.
Absolutely.
If they opt to go with the county's program. I think that's clear. The upside is perhaps you can get your contractor in there much, much quicker and get it done
Possibly.
well before the 12-month period. But again, assuming that there's enough demand, there's enough resources to meet the demand going forward.
And one of the things I'd like to say, we can't require our prime contractors to hire locally, but we strongly encourage in the documentation that we provide to them when they're bidding for the project that we need them to work to hire, to the extent possible, local contractors. And historically, we've found that there are opportunities for everything from laborers that need to be on the ground to dump truck operators to water tenders. There's a lot of different opportunities for local contractors to get involved.
Okay, and so we've talked about a deadline with regard to the state program, which is the 31st of this month, is that right?
Yes.
That's when the right of entry forms need to be submitted so that they can be evaluated and the work can begin, right?
Absolutely.
Is there a deadline associated with the county's program?
There is.
What is that?
The deadline to sign up for the alternative program is February 28th.
Okay. And when you say sign up, does that mean I have to have that whole plan submitted? So that would mean you got to find the contractor, they've got to be licensed, they've got to be certified, they have to put the plan together, and it has to be submitted to the county,
Butte County Environmental Health.
Butte County Environmental Health by
February 28th.
February 28th. And at that point, I declare hey, this is the program that I'm going to be utilizing.
That's right. And the reason that a deadline exists is kind of what we talked about earlier. We have to clean up our community.
Yeah.
If you don't sign up for the government program through the state, and you don't hire a private contractor and sign up through the alternative program, the town and the county are gonna have to use some sort of a nuisance abatement process. And those processes take time because they include due process, right?
Sure,
They give
absolutely.
the property owner due process. And so we want to be able to go through that while the state is still here cleaning,
Okay.
so that we can use them as the contractor that comes through and cleans up the properties,
Got it.
so that the town and county are hamstrung with this huge cost.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we will potentially lien those properties for that cost. And so,
The full cost.
Yeah.
for the full, right, it's not what was in your debris removal policy if you're insured, it's the full cost of the cleanup. And so now is really the opportunity to either sign the right of entry form or find your own contractor to do the work.
And file with the county that you're in.
That's right.
Well, and I want to hit on that point because I think it's important, because again, the upside for hiring a contractor is you might be able to get it done quicker. The downside perhaps is a lot more oversight on your part, a lot more work, and it may cost you more than what your insurance policy allows for, potentially. But getting back to the most, I think the real decision point, or the real key here is that, which is why a decision I think is important for people to make either one of the two, is that the third alternative, not only does it negatively impact the rest of the community, the county, the city, but in the end, it certainly is going to be more costly, because if they lien your property for the full amount of the cleanup, then you've lost a lot of value out of that, and that's certainly problematic. Not to mention the fact that it potentially has a negative impact on your neighbors and other
Absolutely.
Other people within the community. Yeah. So I've got a number of questions here, and I think I'd like to go through them, and then we can go from there. So here's one, and I'm just going to take them in the order that they came. Can a homeowner sign the right of entry and then later choose a private contractor?
So once they've signed into our program, they can opt out.
Okay, so you can revoke the right of entry.
They could. We would ask that folks try to make that decision now,
Sure.
because it just complicates our operation. But
Right.
we are not going to access somebody's property if they don't want us to.
Okay, so the answer to the question is yes, but we still have a deadline, right?
That's right, thank you.
That's right.
Yeah,
And that deadline is February 28th,
right.
right?
So if you wanted to try to withdraw your ROE in April,
Right.
That's why we've got Casey here, because she always
No, I
cleans up.
yeah, no, I think that's a really important thing. I mean, obviously, if you are leaning towards the private contractor and you're unsure, signing the right of entry to get that process going would probably be a wise decision.
Yeah.
And then working on getting your private contractor, and assuming
Sure.
you can get it approved and taken care of in the time frame, and that works for you, that sounds like a way to hedge your bet, so to speak. But at the end of the day, you've got to choose one of those two programs, or potentially suffer the third alternative, which isn't good for anybody.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
you're an expert. You're gonna come do the roadshow.
I don't know. I think we've answered this, but I'll just reiterate: will burned cars be left on the street in front of my home? So it sounds like there are burned cars on the street in front of the home. Are those going to be removed?
So we won't remove either the town or the county will remove any cars that are out in the public right away.
Right.
And I believe in most cases.
CHP has
Go
come,
ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
To interrupt you.
Yeah.
CHP has come through and removed most of the cars in the public right of way. And then the local jurisdiction will come through and take care of the rest in the public right of way. It's possible they appear to be in the public right of way and they're actually on property,
Okay.
in which case your program would take them.
Yeah, and one of the important things for folks to understand, they don't need to do anything about trying to do any DMV paperwork on those cars. We'll collect those. We'll work with CHP and local law enforcement if necessary.
Right.
We'll full accounting of all the vehicles we remove, and documentation will be provided back to the homeowner on those vehicles.
Okay. I know I've been in the areas a lot, and I've seen a lot of cars still there, but you're right in
In
terms
the public right of way?
Well, I mean, they're off of the lot, so to speak, but they may be in part of the private property. The bottom line is, if they're on the lot, if they're close to the road, and they want them removed, you guys will remove them. And if, I'm sorry.
We'll remove cars, we'll remove trailers, motorhomes, a utility trailer, a tractor. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll remove all those.
And if they happen to be parked on the roadway, at some point, either the county or the town would be able to remove them from that.
Correct, yeah,
Yep.
that's right.
All right. Are driveways removed?
So we don't generally remove driveways.
Okay.
If there's a car that burned in the driveway, we may have to remove a portion of the driveway so that we can get those contaminants out of there.
Okay.
But generally, we've gone both ways. Early on in our program, years ago, we used to remove driveways, and we just made it harder for the rebuild because they didn't have a place to stage construction materials.
Okay.
So we try to keep the driveways left behind if we
Okay.
can.
So only if you think that there's a contamination.
Exactly.
Got it. And only that section.
And the other thing we will do, because I know there's a lot of places where folks have perhaps long decorative driveways
Right.
they spend a lot of money on, we will take extraordinary measures when we move our equipment around to try to avoid the driveway if we can. If we need to, we've got tracked equipment, we'll put pads down
Okay.
to try to mitigate any damage.
So there's a real effort to try to keep
There really
those-
is,
Okay.
there really is.
Good. Will wooden decks detached from the burned structure be removed with, if you sign the right of entry?
So if it's a deck that was completely detached,
Yeah.
we generally will collect the wood and debris, but if there was any sort of structure under it, pilings or
Yeah.
anything like that, those will probably end up getting left behind.
Of course, if they don't want it removed, and
Tell us
it's,
if they don't
it's
want
not posing any public health risks, then they can leave it there as well.
One of the things we didn't talk about that's important for folks to always understand, the focus of our cleanup effort is in what we call the ash footprint.
Okay.
So it's where that structure, it's a very defined area, as you
Yeah.
know all too well, very defined area where that structure burned, a home or an outbuilding. That's what we're focused on cleaning up, not other burned vegetation or other parts of the property that burned.
And that kind of comes back into the, what your insurance might cover
Mhm.
could be used to clean up the stuff that's not covered by the program. Is that correct?
That's right.
So in
Absolutely.
that regard, you're actually making those insurance dollars even go farther. Is that a fair statement?
I think that is, yeah.
Okay.
Save your receipts.
Yep.
Okay. When will phase 2 cleanup begin?
January 28th is what we're shooting for right now,
Good.
and we're on track.
And how will the government-sponsored program to be removal timeline be determined? I think we talked about that. Your timeline is 12 months, and we talked about having resources in all of the communities, but concentrating those resources in the areas where the right of entry forms have been signed. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Got it. Will the deadline be extended?
Well, you know, we always evaluate our deadlines. Right now, our focus is on trying to get everybody's ROEs in. We always evaluate those things, but today, the deadline is January 31st, and that's what we're asking folks to make that decision is by that deadline.
Well, and I want to speak a little bit to that as well, because the fact of the matter is, there is a strong desire on the part of many residents in Butte County to push forward, to rebuild, to get back on the road to recovery. And setting that deadline so that we can start the debris removal process pushes us farther down the road to recovery.
Absolutely.
If we delay that recovery date gets delayed, and the longer that recovery takes, I think the harder it is for people. It's gonna be harder for people to get back into their homes. It's gonna be harder on our economy. It's gonna be harder all the way around. And so I understand that it makes it difficult to make a decision, but at the end of the day, sometimes we have to make tough decisions in order to move forward.
Right, and this is one of the toughest decisions folks have, and that's why we want to use this time between now and the 31st to answer any and all of their questions we can.
Perfect. This question, and I don't know if you can answer it, because it's a bit subjective. Certainly life comes with a lot of risk, but the question is, how safe are we living in town while the removal process is going on?
So if you're living in a home that was not lost, and you've taken measures to do a tune-up on your HVAC unit and clean anything, smoke and so forth that got into your home, as you said, it is a personal decision, but historically, folks have moved back into their homes that weren't lost. Obviously, kids, animals walking around the neighborhood, want to minimize that because we've got so much ash and debris, but it really is a personal choice. As I said earlier, we are going to take extraordinary measures while we're doing the cleanup to keep ash and debris down. And especially over the next several months when we've had a lot of rain, that's just going to happen on the natural, that everything's
Yeah.
been compacted. But as we move into spring and summer and things start to dry out, we will take extraordinary measures. We use a lot of water on our cleanup to keep the ash and debris down. We're rigorous about our air monitoring to make sure that we're not kicking up ash and debris. And so, you know, we will take the measures we need to take to ensure that we're not creating a further issue in the community.
I appreciate that, and your explanation brought another question in my mind, and again, if this is kind of outside your wheelhouse, I understand that, but I'm gonna ask it. So we're using a lot of water to keep the dust down. But what is our concern about that water becoming contaminated and then getting into the groundwater? Has there any thought of that, or how do we deal with that?
So the local regional water quality control board has been testing the waterways,
Okay.
Not necessarily the aquifer,
Okay.
but they have been testing the waterways in and around Butte County, and as their results come in, they're releasing that publicly. So they're keeping an eye on that.
Okay. So this goes to what we talked about a little while ago when I brought up some difficulties with the state the contractors. And this question is, how are the state contractors being vetted? So there is certainly a standard process, but can you speak a little bit to how was it that this particular contractor, or these particular contractors have been chosen by the you guys and ultimately Cal Recycle?
I'm not a government procurement expert, but I can talk in
Nobody
generalities. Government procurement, you have to meet the certification requirements, the licensing requirements. You have to have a demonstrated, in terms of our debris contractors, you have to have a demonstrated history of working on debris programs in California successfully. We won't consider any contractors that have ever been disbarred from prior procurements in California. So that's kind of in a big picture, the factors that we're looking at. But we're looking to make sure you've met all the requirements, and then we're looking at the bid itself.
Okay.
And we have to provide assurances to the taxpayers that we've got a contractor that has met all of our contracting requirements, has a positive experience working with us, and ultimately is competitive in the price that they've put forward.
And I do have a little bit of experience with this too, and it is very complicated, and there's obviously no guarantees in life, no matter what the endeavor. That said, we talked a little bit, not only is there the things that the due diligence has to be done with regard to vetting these folks, but then there's the monitoring afterwards. And you talked a little bit about the difficulties that these particular contractors may have had under other operations, or what other cleanups have involved other entities overseeing them. In this case, it's the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, which will be overseeing, in the end, all of this work. And so if there's a problem, you guys have the ability to move in and address it. Do we understand that correctly?
Absolutely. There's a process on all of our cleanups through our debris operations center we talked about earlier, where if somebody believes that we did something wrong on their property, they can essentially file a claim with us. We'll investigate that, we'll meet with them, we'll determine if it was something that was negligently done, and if it was, we'll take steps to remediate that.
Good. I want to take this one because we have talked about vehicles. We talked about vehicles presumably owned by the people on the property. What about vehicles that are owned by the renters who are renting the property? Same thing?
Same thing. We'll collect the vehicle, we'll do an accounting of the vehicle, and get that paperwork back to the owner to provide to the renter.
Got it. And is there an email box for the right of entry program?
There is. So I'll give a couple of contacts. The Right of Entry Center email is roe@buttecounty.net. It's really a one-way email at this point, so people email in and can submit the right of entries. They will call you back or email you back if they're missing documentation.
Okay.
It's really best to drop it off in person.
Okay.
I've been in the Right of Entry Center. I've worked to review some of those. It's really easy to just miss a little something. So you can take it to the Disaster Recovery Center at the Chico Mall there in Chico, the old Sears building, Monday through Saturday 9 to 6, and drop it off at the environmental health table. They'll do a completeness check and make sure you have everything. They can make copies of stuff for you.
Okay.
Same thing at the Right of Entry Center here at 202 Miraloma Drive.
Okay.
So that's the best way is to drop it off. I recognize that not everybody's living in the area.
Correct.
So they can also call 530-552-3155. That's right into the Right of Entry Center. We'll post that phone number in the stream here. So that's really the best way. I know some people have been emailing them in, but just what we're seeing is those are the people that are missing documentation.
And I'd just like to add that Casey and the entire county team have done a phenomenal job with ButteCountyRecovers.org. It's an extremely comprehensive location where you can get information on everything that we're talking about, get questions answered, get phone numbers for different resources. So I encourage folks to take a look at that.
Very good. And the question, and the reason I asked about it, the question was, is the ROE email being monitored? And I get from you, it is being monitored, but it's a one-way mechanism of information. So they're not getting responses back.
I know that doesn't feel particularly great, and I would be concerned about that as well.
Okay.
There is an overwhelming amount
Okay.
of traffic, whether it's walk-in traffic, telephone traffic, email traffic. And we're doing the best we can to process all these right of entry forms to get them ready for the state to plan their operation.
Right.
We're doing the best that we can to get back to people, but honestly, the best thing that people can do is walk through those doors and get their questions answered. Again, they can always call because we know that people are living outside of the area.
All right. The answer to the question though is it is being monitored, but the response might not come back to you.
It's a little one way right now.
Understand.
One way.
So those are the questions that I have right now. Are there any other questions?
Sheriff, I actually had a question for you that's come up in a lot of our degree town halls. One of the things we always talk about is we don't want people disturbing their ash footprint. They start moving ash around or material around, potentially disqualifies them.
Okay.
And a lot of folks have asked us questions. They said, hey, we came back to our property and there was metal and debris that was moved to the side. There was this item that was moved to the side. I've always speculated that that was part of the unfortunate operations that you had to go through. Can you speak a little bit to what you guys had to do?
You bet. That is a great question, and I'm glad you got glad to be able to answer it. So very likely, if you get there and you find that, for example, in mobile homes, we would have to cut the roofs in half and move them off to the side, or that there was metal that was moved off to the side, very strong likelihood that that was part of our effort to go through, search those properties for human remains. In some cases, I've had people talk about how personal property items, mementos, things like that, were stacked up along the foundation. In many cases, those were our search teams and our anthropologists going through. When they would find something that they thought someone might want to keep, they would set them aside for them so that they could continue with their work. And on that note, is it fair to say that if the footprint was disturbed by virtue of the search and recovery effort, that will be covered by the program?
Absolutely. And that's what we've let folks know, is that we understand because of the magnitude of this operation, there's a lot more disturbed material than we normally would have on a cleanup. And you know, if somebody's overly concerned, just make a note in the ROE. I returned to my property. This is what it looked like, and we're not going to nickel and dime.
Fantastic. Very good. And I appreciate that. Yeah, that's shows how there's so many moving parts to this whole thing. All right. So since we don't have any other questions, and I think we've covered both programs real well, and I really do appreciate the fact that you both kind of sat down and helped explain it to me. I think I'll be in a better position to explain it to people when they ask me the questions. But the bottom line is this, folks. You know, we've dealt with just an unprecedented event. It is the worst fire in the history of the state of California, the most destructive, regrettably the deadliest. And we have all been through so much. Some of us much more than others, and I certainly understand that. It has been very, very difficult from November 8th up to this point. And unfortunately, the road ahead of us is still going to be long and still going to be difficult and still going to have some very tough decisions to go forward. But we've got to make decisions. The worst thing that you can do at a point like this is not make a decision. That doesn't move us in the direction that we ultimately need to go. So I hope that this information has been helpful. I'm hoping that you have a better idea of the pros and cons of the various programs. You understand the true negative impact of not making a decision. And I hope that you're now provided with the information you need to make a decision that's in your best interest, be it going with the state program or with the alternative program. But we need you to make the decision. We need you to do it within the time frames so that we can all go forward and get farther down the road to recovery. We want our community to be a safe place. We want to rebuild, and this is the next step in that process. So thank you very much for joining me, and I appreciate you guys as well. And hopefully we can get this done and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.